This is The Big Conversation on The Breakfast Show here on KBC English Service.
And let me tell you, this conversation is necessary, it's timely, and we are so glad that we are having it with people who know a lot more about it than other people, especially those who pretend to know about it. We always keep on saying carbon credits, and sometimes everyone keeps on floating in conversation. That's the reason why we asked you, what's the one thing that you would like to know about how they work in Kenya? And we asked you to post your comments on our social media platforms. I'll be going through them in just a little while with our two esteemed guests. Oh, my Lord, let me tell you, reading these CVs is quite. One is a seasoned advocate with 20 years of experience specializing in emerging laws, climate change, and environmental laws. Unlike it, she wrote a groundbreaking article in the Business Daily Africa, by the way. It sparked crucial conversation, so we're really looking forward to her insights. None other than Dr. Kathy Mputhia Mugendi. Good morning.
Good morning, Nick. How are you?
I am great. Thank you for making time to come to the Breakfast Club this morning to educate us on this very, very necessary topic.
Right.
And she is not alone. She is joined by a human rights and environmental lawyer, also from is it C Mputhia Advocates?
Right, Simputhia.
So he's also from Simputhia Advocates. His focus is on the intersection of environmental and human rights law. Ooh. And he's also an activist with Haki Nawiri Africa. Mr. Maurice Onyango, good morning to you, sir.
Good morning, Nick.
It is great to have you also here to help us dissect this thing. So we believe in educating here at KBC English Service, so we're going to start from the basics, the very basics, those two words, carbon credits. Kathy,
yes,
I want you to tell us, carbon credits, what's that all about?
Okay, thank you, Nick, and thank you for having us over. So I'll just give a very brief background.
All right.
So the first thing before we come to carbon credits is to understand greenhouse gases.
All right.
Right? So due to day-to-day life, day-to-day activities, we emit as living things or as human beings, we emit a lot of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. And there are mainly three types of greenhouse gases. So we have carbon dioxide is one of them, methane, and nitrous, I don't know if it's oxide, one of those. And greenhouse gases are gases that trap heat in the atmosphere, right? And it is when the levels of greenhouse gases are good, that is healthy for the climate, right? But when it goes overboard, we begin to have things like global warming, climatic change, because now these are gases that trap heat. Right, so I don't know if you've noticed it's been very hot.
It's been very hot of late. Right? I mean, I like it, but I know I don't think it's a good thing. I don't think
it's like a weird sort of hot, right?
Yeah.
So that could be because of greenhouse gas emissions. So basically, there's a need to reduce these greenhouse emissions, to reduce global warming and so on, and the negative impacts. So basically, there are two ways of reducing these greenhouse emissions. One is by avoidance, and this is by avoiding activities that lead to these emissions. So, Nick, you'll be shocked that one person, one individual, contributes to about 4 to 6 tons of carbon dioxide emissions per year.
Wow.
Right? Shocking, right?
Wow, that is shocking.
Yeah, because, we like today, we used a vehicle, right? And the exhaust fumes. Sometimes you take a flight, So even as individuals, we do contribute to this greenhouse emissions. So, like I was saying, one way of balancing the greenhouse emission levels is by reducing the emissions. And one way of doing it is through reduction of carbon footprints. And what I mean is by avoiding activities. There are some people who totally avoid activities that will release those emissions. Like, I don't know if you know the girl from, is it Sweden or
she's from
Switzerland, who does not even fly. She doesn't even take flights. So as to reduce the
How does she get around?
I think by boat.
Fair enough.
Yeah, so basically, because of these global warming things, the nations of the world came together and they came up with a system of trying to regulate these carbon emissions. And so every country has a limited or set level of emissions. Every company within those countries have limited levels of emissions. So basically, many countries, especially like in the industrialized nations, they do exceed the limited levels. Like if you're manufacturing or things like that, the levels will go high.
Big industry countries.
Right, big industry countries. So what happens is that they need to balance out. They need to offset their carbon footprint.
Sure.
And so how do they do that? They go to another nation or another entity that has sort of higher levels of reduction emission. So the name carbon credit suggests that there's something to do with a credit over there. And basically, back to your question, what is a carbon credit? So a carbon credit is a digital certificate. Okay?
All right.
And it's a digital certificate that is issued after measurement and a verifiable process. And this digital certificate claims that attached to that certificate is a claim of reducing greenhouse emissions. So it's basically, Nick, taking you as an example. Let's say you have gotten into a reforestation project, right? Which contributes to the reduction of greenhouse emissions, including carbon.
Yeah.
So you planted trees in your 10 acres and, you've contributed to that. So what does Nick do? You go to the global accreditation body to measure and verify how many carbon credits your project, right? How many carbon credits your project has. Then that body, after measuring and verifying, issues you with a digital certificate. That is what we call a carbon credit. Right? Yeah.
Very well explained. Very well explained. And now we know Dr. Caroline Mulenya from Kaimosi Friends University, listening to the show, said kudos to you for a very good explanation on that.
Welcome.
Now there's a listener who posted this a little while ago, said because he wanted to know what are carbon credits.
Yeah.
Now that Sakana, Sakana had a follow-up question: will there be carbon debits later on? It's a valid question, right? I mean,
yeah.
Is that a thing?
Well, maybe. As of now, no. But I think by practice, the companies are probably would exceed the limit. I would say they debit. They owe the earth.
Indeed.
Right? Yeah.
It's all good. Maurice, I want to turn to you. First of all, someone called Skylar Nuru says big up to our Wakili Maurice. So shout out to Nilazma. But what are the real world implications for our communities and our economy when it comes to carbon credits?
Thank you, Nick. The implications on the community are quite large. Let's start with the fact that carbon credits these are projects that are located on land, and the reality in Kenya is that most of our land is actually community land. If you look at the large tracts of land, most of them, very few are privately owned, but a majority, even where the carbon credit projects are situated, are community lands. This means that some communities, say where we have avoidance projects, like reforestation projects, some communities may be forced to leave their livelihoods, let me say, like pastoral communities, because you may be required to just leave that land, to preserve that land for the purpose of getting carbon credits. Say if I'm doing a reforestation and I need to plant, say, 10,000 trees, I cannot have communities engaging or actively doing an economic activity in that land. So it is a bit of sacrifice for the communities, but I know we'll come to this, but our regulations do provide that in case there's a carbon credit project within a community, if it is land-based, Land-based, this means that if you are planting trees and everything, then you ought to give a certain percentage, 40% of the proceeds to the community. If it is non-land-based, like solar or wind plants, you have to give 25% of the proceeds to the community. So that is the economic cash that the communities do have. That there is a chance of increasing their livelihoods, but then it comes with that element of sacrifice that I have said, which it also poses some conflict. We'll get to the challenges, and it poses some conflict with communities. We are African. We have our cultures. Some communities may find it hard to change their culture simply to preserve the environment. Yeah.
Right, and we need the environment. It's the only home we have. Kathy, let's talk about your article in the Business Daily Africa.
Right. Yeah.
It highlighted the practical steps for businesses to enter the carbon credit market. Now, for our listeners who are new to this concept, break down the fundamentals of how carbon credits are generated and traded in Kenya, especially in light of the new 2024 regulations.
Right. Okay. So, Nick, what I'd say is before you can get onto the carbon credit market, you must have a carbon credit. So, many people assume that, okay, I have 1,000 trees somewhere, so I can sell my I can earn money from that, but it doesn't work like that. You have to get certification. And how do you get certification? Like I had mentioned before, there are these global accreditation bodies that do the measurement and the verification of how many carbon credits does your project actually have. So some of these global accreditation bodies, an example is a Vera standard, or the gold standard. We have the American Carbon Registry. We have another one called the Climate Action Reserve. And basically, these are the issuers of the carbon credit. So what happens if you're beginning a project? You need to work with an expert. So you don't just go to anybody. You don't just go to any guy who has done environment. You have to make sure that this person is even accredited by the parent body.
Right.
So this person comes, and each body or each standard have their own self-regulated mechanism of how you qualify, right? So maybe the Vera standard will differ from the gold standard in the requirements. So each of these standards have the things that you need to submit. Of course, there are feasibility studies, there are technical studies.
Sure.
There are legal due diligence studies and so on. So your expert is the one who will come and help you to prepare the project documentation, because it's quite a bit of work. And once you prepare that project documentation, you submit to the accreditation body, and they issue you with the carbon credits. So let me just give an example. One carbon credit is said to be equivalent to 1 ton of emission of carbon dioxide, right? So that means maybe 5. If you do the math, basically, it can give you an estimate of like how many carbon credits you could estimate to have. So about 50 trees, 31 to 46 trees, will give you 1 carbon credit. But the most important thing is that it must be measured, it must be verified, and it's a digital certificate. Yeah, so if you want to have carbon credits, you have to go through the process.
Well said, well explained. I like it. I will come back with another question a little bit later on. Maurice, let's go to you and briefly touch on the importance of preventing double counting of emission reductions. According to the newly established National Carbon Registry in Kenya, how does it ensure this? Like, what mechanisms do they have in place to guarantee the integrity when it comes to issuing of carbon credits?
Thank you, Nick. The measures in place by the regulation of 2024, though once we get to there, we'll find that they are quite wanting. That is why we are actually doing, there's a new regulation that's coming up, the 2025 regulation. But as Katya said, the process is quite tedious, and also it's quite long. So that long process, it's just there are various stakeholders who are put in place to make sure that every carbon credit certificate that is issued is actually authentic. Because some of the key challenges that we have in the market, as you said, there's double counting, where a project is submitted not once but twice, and also so the government cannot assure the trust of investors. You will find that in Kenya, our market is voluntary as of now, but new regulations are coming that will ensure that industries do have caps. So in the voluntary market, the key element is trust, investor trust. So where we have double counting, and also where projects are not authentic, we will find that in such areas now, the investor trust is reduced in our carbon credits. Yeah.
Trust will go a long way.
Yeah.
Two things, Kathy.
Right.
Number one, could you remind us about that figure again? You said one person releases how many?
Well, this is a research. I don't know how true it is, but one adult would release an average of 4 to 6 tons.
4 to 6 tons
that is of carbon dioxide or carbon footprints per year. Per annum.
Okay, because I was going to throw this question of you, the lady who doesn't fly and whatnot. I was like, so as a human, can you get someone to examine you and get carbon credits as a human being? I try not to omit, but that as jokes aside, a lot of listeners are thinking, okay, so this thing is about I can make money from it. And we know there's projects like the Kenya Agricultural Carbon Project.
Right.
We appreciate their efforts, but realistically speaking, what are the financial prospects for farmers and other participants in this country when it comes to carbon credits?
Okay, thanks, Nick. Actually, our journey towards carbon credits came as a result of recommending to agribusinesses to consider carbon credit financing as an alternative source of revenues. So when you do the math, it doesn't look like a lot of money, right? Because one carbon credit equals to about $10 to $96. So if you do the math, it's like 46 trees will give you $96.
$96, that's close to 100,000?
Kenya shillings, right?
100,000 Kenya shillings.
And that's from how many, 46 trees, right?
Yeah, that's a long time.
Trees, right? Yeah. So I think for businesses to make money out of this, it's having a strategic thinking. So one thing I want to say is, before we go to the financial bits,
all right,
is just to look at it, look at the motive positively or the impact. So knowing that an individual releases about 4 to 6 tons of carbon dioxide per annum, it's telling us that we need to plant at least 150 to 300 trees.
True.
As an individual, so that we are not in debit, right? So carbon credits can be used strategically. Businesses can get into these carbon projects, and there's a lot of excitement about green projects and going green and so on, right?
It's a thing now.
It's a thing, right? And then that can help you to attract investors.
True. They're
not coming to invest in carbon projects necessarily, but an impact investor will be attracted to your company because you've gone green, because you're environmentally conscious. Then there's a lot of funding opportunities around climatic change. Okay, so the 3 types of funding: there's debt, equity, and grant. So there's actually a project in Embu whereby these guys were given funding to get into carbon credit project. It was actually geared towards that, and the repayment for the investor is you give the investor the carbon credit. So you're not repaying money. You're giving them after a certain milestone is achieved, you're giving them a carbon credit. The other one is equity, where the private equity funds come and invest money into your company for in exchange for carbon credits. So basically, they will have a stake in whatever is made in the carbon credits. But what I can say also about getting into carbon credit projects, like we are thinking of doing ourselves, it's an opportunity for CSR. Absolutely. Right? So if we count how many people we are in the office and how many emissions we do per year times, there's a way you can measure your carbon footprint as an organization and diversify your CSR. So it's not just about donations and, visiting the children's homes. It's now even about getting to just being in a good, having a good carbon footprint. So there are very many opportunities depending on your motive and how you look at it. Maybe one thing I can say, it seems like you have to have so much land to, right, for this thing to make sense. So it's just about being strategic. Maybe, let's say it's an area like Langata, and you have different parcels of lands as neighbors. Okay. So you can form a company, right? All of you form a company, and then you lease your land to that company. Then the company is the one that does the carbon credit project. Then from whatever is made, then it distributes accordingly across. Yeah. So what I can say, it's just being strategic in your thinking. As always is with any venture that you hope to make money from, strategy is key. Yeah. That's a good one. Good idea. Maurice, regulations. They mention annual social contributions with land-based projects allocating, 40%? Yeah, 40% of earnings to the community development. So how do these contributions translate into tangible benefits for the local communities? And how is the Community Project Development Committee even involved in the whole process?
Thank you. How this project usually translates is in form of CSR activities. Okay. You will find that most of the entities engaging in carbon credits, they extend this by putting in place institutions within the community that serve the community. Let's say they will build schools, hospitals. So they do not trickle it down in form of money, but they develop the community. Actually, what the regulation says is that you are required to do a community development agreement with the community. Where the project is situated, and this requires the approval of the committee appointed by the members of the community. But that is the law. As I said, when you go down, you will find that there are a lot of challenges, especially since there's no way to track that the number of developments that have been done in this community is actually 40% of the proceeds. So that is why we are seeing a lot of friction between communities and most of these projects.
All right. So, Kathy, because we had mentioned this during your introduction, before you got to studio, you advised tea factories on diversifying income through carbon credits. Now, given Kenya's economy heavily relies on agriculture, what are the specific challenges that you feel need to be addressed to scale up, the participation of the smallholder farmers? Right. Okay. So one thing we faced, and this a real challenge we faced, is lack of awareness. Lack of awareness. Yeah. So you'd go to a factory somewhere or a tea growing zone, and they have very arable land. Yeah. And according to, as per the Tea Act, you're even supposed to plant a percentage. I don't know, I can't remember from my head, but you're supposed to plant a little forest within the tea growing zone. So one challenge we have is lack of awareness. Second, it's very technical. Even for those who are aware, maybe I can say like the lawyers or the whatever, it's a very technical thing. So you meet guys saying that, yes, we've heard about carbon credits, but we really don't understand how to get started. Number 3, I think the lack of professionals. Now, like the broker who offers the measurement and the verification, it's sort of like you have to rely on somebody from abroad, or becomes expensive in terms of doing this. So how smallholder farmers can do it, I feel, is to intentionally and actively look for financiers who can finance even the certification process. I think there's a project somewhere that was
funded from the onset. So you're not funding the certification process from your revenues, but there's a financier.
There's a financier who's...
Right. He's funding that and he's giving you the expert. And what I can say, those people exist.
Are they hard to find?
No, in this world today, surely
you can find anyone.
You can find anyone and anything.
That's fair. That's
right.
Fair.
Yeah.
Okay. Fair enough, Maurice. The concept of environmental integrity is central to the regulations, right?
Yeah.
So how are projects assessed to ensure they genuinely contribute to emissions reduction and avoid negative environmental impacts, especially the ones concerning potential land use changes?
Thank you. The assessment, as Kathy did indicate earlier, is a sort of what needs to be done is a feasibility study.
Right.
That's the first step. And the feasibility study, you will find that it's divided in 4 core areas. We have the technical feasibility. The technical feasibility, now this is where the project will be assessed, whether it really contributes to reduction of emissions and whether it deserves carbon credits. Under the Act, you will find something called permanence. Permanence means that a project should be able to last long, so its impact should be long lasting.
Right.
That's why if you have farmers dealing with crops, say like these short-term crops, there is a high possibility that their crops may not qualify for a carbon credit project because of that aspect of permanence. The second aspect of feasibility definitely is financial. Every stage of getting verification and validation requires finances. Right from the technical, you will require to pay an expert to assess whether the project can qualify, and also you will require to pay the relevant regulatory bodies to assess you and also to give you the certificates. Then you also have the regulatory compliance, which is a legal feasibility study. You need to assess whether your project can really work in Kenya, because we have laws governing our environment and we also have laws governing the climate change. So lawyers need to assess and look at your documents and see whether your documents actually are compliant with our local laws. The fourth aspect is now your organization, is the organization feasibility. You see, when we are talking about carbon credits and everyone wants to get into it, but do they have the capacity to actually get into it? It's a matter of, do you have your in-house capabilities to actually do a project? Because you are required to have structures. I'm sure every organization requires you to have structures, and your structure should be able to support a project. Now, once all these 4 have checked, you do what is called a PDD, that is a project, the project plan, and this plan is the one that will submit now to the regulatory authority, and if it's approved, then you are issued with your certificate.
Okay, nice. We're 25 minutes away from 9 in the morning on this Tuesday, talking carbon credits with Dr. Kathy Mputhia Mugendi, seasoned advocate with over 20 years of experience and specializing in climate change and environmental law. Also joining us, we have Maurice Onyango, human rights and environmental lawyer. Kathy, I want to go to you real quick and check on this. The regulations by the National Carbon Registry in Kenya allow for fiscal and non-fiscal incentives for project proponents. So what are some of the most significant incentives and how effective have they been when it comes to attracting investment and promoting carbon credit projects?
Okay, thank you, Nick. Maybe I can swing that question to Maurice.
Some of the incentives that our government has put in place is, let me start with the tax. You find that the tax on carbon projects is quite low, especially in Kenya, because Kenya and Cameroon are ranked like the highest traders in carbon credits. So our tax regime in terms of green solutions is quite favorable. I think if you saw that when our president did launch the electric motorbikes, they were VAT free, they were tax free import. So imports that on anything that helps protect the environment, the tax regime is quite favorable, and that is the fiscal policy that the government has as of now.
Now that you're there, Maurice,
Yeah.
let me throw this one at you. The Climate Change Fund is set to receive a portion of the earnings from carbon projects. So, how are these funds normally utilized? And how is their impact measured in terms of the mitigation of climate change?
The funds are not per se from the carbon projects. They are from what will be gotten from the registration.
Okay.
So it's 50% of the funds that goes to the climate fund, and whether there is a mechanism to track the use of those funds, as of now there's none. But the regulations that are coming in will provide for a way that those funds can be tracked. Right now, we can just say they're used for administrative purposes.
But trust is also important, right?
Quite important.
You said that. Talking on trust, Kathy, we're back to you. You've written a book on corporate governance.
Yes.
Okay, so tell us, how does good governance play a role in ensuring transparency and accountability in the carbon credit market, particularly when it comes to managing the revenue that's going to be generated from these projects?
Okay, so speaking from a business perspective, right? Carbon credit is like an alternative source of funding, and what I can call innovative funding that businesses and even individuals can get into. So, like with every good governance principles on financial management, it calls for accountability, it calls for transparency, and basically corporate governance is about having systems and procedures to govern how an entity is controlled and managed. So when we're talking about governance, you have to put the systems in place, right? So that it's not done in a haphazard manner. And then you also have to have the procedures. And this is what we call, you need to have like financial policies. You maybe even need to have environmental policies, or if you're really into the carbon credit thing, having a policy around how, setting the hierarchy of the roles and responsibilities of maybe the team that is involved in that. You need to have processes, what we call SOPs. We need to have
what are SOPs?
Standard operating systems and procedures, right? Okay. And that's part of good governance, to govern on the day-to-day management. So in terms of governance, even on an entity level, or let's say at a county level, you need to have those structures, those systems, the policies, the SOPs, and also train the people who are, your team. They need to have the capacity to handle this. Yeah, so that's what I can say.
All right, I like it. Maurice, the regulations require project ownership to be clearly indicated, right?
Yeah.
So in the context of community-based projects, how are we going to ensure that these local communities have genuine ownership and control over carbon credit initiatives?
Thank you. The first step is just complying with what the law says, that every project should have that community development agreement. Because the fact that there's a project located in your land, number one, does not negate your rights to that land. It does not mean that the person doing the project owns the land. He still maintains the rights of a proprietor, and in this case, the community maintains the right to, perhaps the right to use will be limited, and everything should be provided for in the agreement. I think perhaps the challenge that we are facing with regards to community land is, number one, misinformation and also lack of capacity. Most of the people entering into these contracts do not understand the technical aspects of carbon credits. So you will find that perhaps a project developer will take advantage of that fact, that they are dealing with people who do not understand the benefits or what it means. And some of these contracts, when the committee signs them, they are not aware that they're actually giving away the rights to use their land. So it just calls for what the Act called for prior informed consent. The consent should be taken before the project begins, and it should be informed. Informed in the instance that the committee should be able to understand what they are getting into, and if possible, it should be in their own language. The project developer is the one to take that. They're supposed to make sure the community understands and is guided on the step-to-step basis on what the project will involve. And also make sure the community also knows the benefits that may accrue and the rights they're giving away towards the project. Yeah.
Do you feel like, especially for like marginalized communities who may be affected by these projects, as a human rights lawyer, you feel like that would really help with the intersection between carbon credit profits projects and the protection of socioeconomic rights?
Yeah. For the marginalized communities, number one, most of them, let's start with some communities that we actually called indigenous, marginalized and indigenous. Some of them live in forests. That's a fact.
True.
So these communities that live in forests, and the forests are they form a huge chunk of the ecosystem that is supposed to reduce the greenhouse emissions. Now, let's say a project developer wants to do a reforestation drive. This requires that the community moves out. And if these communities were to be supported with other sources of livelihood, it will make their moving out for environmental preservation to be easier. And if they were to be informed of the climate risks, the reality is that in the developing countries, we are actually yet to fully comprehend the impacts of climate change. We are lucky we don't have tsunamis, we don't have like tornadoes, those violent weather patterns, but they are coming because with the increasing global emissions, these are coming. So it is for the communities to understand that this climate change is happening and this needs to be this needs to be done so that we mitigate and we stop the adverse consequences.
We learn from the West mistakes.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. Kathy, the EY report states that, and I quote, each transaction in a carbon project results in a reduction or removal of greenhouse gas emissions, end quote.
Yeah.
So how are these reductions verified, measured, and what are the potential risks of overstating or even worse still, misinterpreting the emission reduction figures?
Okay, so like I mentioned before, it's a technical standard. There's a very technical way in which it is done. And each of the global accreditation bodies, they have their own self-regulated mechanism on how this is done, right? So the correct expert to work with in terms of the levels and so on would be an environmental expert who is very specifically specializing in the area of this area of carbon credits. So it's not just any environmental expert. Let's say somebody who has maybe the license for the environmental social impact assessment, but it's somebody who is actually trained in the area of carbon credits, and what's more, has specialized in that from that particular body that has issued him with a license. So what I can say is, in terms of that, is getting a partnership or recruiting somebody who has been accredited. That's the most important thing. Somebody who's been accredited by the global accreditation body, because this person has been trained and is a certified person, and now that person will advise you on the specifics of your project, because each global standard has different things that they are looking for. Okay, and then also, as Maurice mentioned, about the feasibility study. And this, the expert that you work with will play a very key role in ensuring the person's responsibility is to ensure that your project meets the threshold or the required benchmark as per your global accreditation standard. So in terms of ensuring the accuracy or the accuracy of the levels and so on, each standard, like that's what I just say in overall, that each global standard has its internal self-regulated system on how they make sure that every project adheres to what they set as the standards. Just like any professional body, there are those professional guidelines. So what I can tell the listener is your role would be to recruit somebody who is accredited, and that person will give you all the disclosures and all the information on the process, on the documentation, and so on, because they vary. Yeah.
Indeed.
Yeah.
And those are good ones to check off the list to make sure that the project will get a green light.
Yes.
What about the project becoming majorly successful? Because you believe that, this is something that can actually create even generational wealth.
Yeah.
So strategy, you mentioned earlier, is what's important. But what key strategies will maximize the economic benefits for a Kenyan, or even for Kenya in general?
Okay. One thing, many Kenyans have land in Ushago.
Okay. Kind of.
Okay.
Everyone has a land to go home to.
There's something at home, right?
Sour.
And Kenya is majorly, our mainstay is agriculture. And Kenya is a very arable country. As of now, we have 9% forest coverage, and then there's a lot of idle land, like when you drive to Mombasa, like from Kibwezi to there's no houses, nothing. So in terms of an average Kenyan plugging into this thing, so one I can say, as an individual, you can impact your environment positively by getting to the habit of tree planting. But as a community, as Maurice has mentioned, just coming together and maybe those, the quarter acres and the 1/8 acres, coming together and doing a project as a community. Yeah. Like the one that mentioned, you can do a company, have shares, and this thing gets into the carbon project.
It's a good plan.
It's a good plan, right? And for the counties, county governments, I feel it can be a source of revenue if they partner with the local communities. So because there's a land ownership rights that you can't plant whatever on someone else's land without permission. Yeah. So I feel it's an opportunity for partnerships for the county governments, and I think they have the capacity to do it, in terms of it is easier for them to get funding as a county. They can get a green bond or something to finance this climatic project. What about the national parks? We already have trees in there. We already have, like Nairobi National Park.
Yeah.
Why not get extra revenue by having the carbon credit project within the park? So it becomes an extra source of revenue for KWS, Kenya Forestry, and even at the coast, the mangrove forests and all this. So I feel like there's a lot of unutilized potential within Kenya, and a lot of untapped resources there. In terms of the common Kenyan guy, the common man, back in the village, again, I will talk about collaborating with each other, forming a partnership, and doing this together. If you go to Embu, there's a place called Camp Ndunda. I think Camp Ndunda. When I went there, I was surprised to learn it's a community project. Like they have it's a very dope place, yeah. Like it looks like a private resort, but it's actually a community project done by the community, owned by the community, and the revenues are shared. So for carbon credits, I feel the same thing can apply. Yeah.
Now, Maurice, in the interest of time, I want to give you a two-part question, and you can give us the highlights of it, because the regulations require project proponents to conduct environmental and social impact assessments. Tell us how these assessments are conducted, like what mechanisms are put in place, but also the regulations do mention adherence to specific standards and safeguards. So after you tell us about how the assessments are conducted, maybe you can touch on the most critical standards and safeguards that carbon credit projects must comply with.
Okay. So Nick, the environmental impact and social assessments are done under what we have, the Physical Land Use and Planning Act, and you also have the Environmental Management and Coordination Act, that is EMCA. And the body here, the body that is mandated with doing this is NEMA.
Okay.
So we do have people who are specialized in conducting environmental impact and social assessment.
Okay.
These are experts who are in those fields. Basically, the assessment is supposed to measure the impact of a project on the environment. Will it affect the environment negatively or positively? And in the social instance, it's supposed to measure how the community will be affected, either negatively or positively. Will you questions such as how much land will you be using? Will the community be able to access those lands? What will the community benefit? Now, will the proceeds trickle down to the community? Those are the questions that an expert will be seeking to answer.
Okay.
If there are standards for verification, you mean?
Yes, the adherence to specific standards and safeguards. So we're looking for the most critical standards and safeguards that carbon credit projects have to comply with.
Oh, the specific standards. The key standard, the crucial standard is just the aspect of how much emissions are you removing from the environment. That is the basic standard, because, as I said when we began the session, is that you are required to prove that you are removing. There is a level for your project to actually be said to be viable. There is an amount, and we are talking metric tons. If you look at the projects in Kenya, like the I won't mention, but if you look at the projects in Kenya, they actually remove metric tons. So it's not just about removing carbon from the environment. It's about how much is it impactful. It must be impactful. Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. Final questions. Final question to you, Kathy. In the next 5-10 years, how do you see the carbon credit market looking? And maybe what are the key trends that policymakers should stay aware of?
Okay, thanks. So currently, there's a lot of influence from the geopolitical trend. Like if we're talking 2025, there's a lot of reduced funding on climatic change projects, especially from the US, the geopolitical dynamics. So this is likely to impact if it's something to do with funding in this climatic change spaces. People who are in carbon credits will in that market will have to now look for alternative sources of funding. Maybe they will need to go to Middle East or Europe or other places, because the US had been a very big financier of climatic change initiatives, and this funding has been cut. If you've been following the news, Maurice was telling me that the UAE has committed to about $600 million.
Wow.
Yeah, $600 million to fund African carbon credit projects. So it means, in terms of the political aspect of the funding, there'll have to be a shift. So in terms of, as this is happening, climatic change is a real thing. Like it's not going to wait for funds. It's
true.
It's something that is ongoing, and so there's definitely a very urgent need for policy. And I think the policymakers are, I think they're active on that end, because currently there's some bill or something being drafted for consideration. So there's also the regional initiatives in Africa, because Africa is the one that is the carbon credit. We are the ones who don't. We are not as industrialized in terms of emissions.
Lucky us.
Lucky. Well, that's debatable, but anyway. So there's a lot of African initiatives.
Yeah.
A few years ago, there was a Nairobi Declaration where different African countries came and made some declarations on climatic change and the policy thrust. So in terms of even the Africa Union, I'm sure the initiatives at that level, the initiatives may be at the EAC level and at a national level. So for Kenya, I do. Kenya is, I think, the second largest issuer of carbon credits in Africa.
Awesome.
DRC was tops, then now Kenya. So I feel like with more awareness, more intentionality, I think it's something that, something that can actually be active, and a lot of partnership with experts in terms of policy making, so that it's not just coming from the government. It's also you also have the inputs of experts and a lot of studies being done and research. So to me, I feel maybe currently there may be a bit of a negative impact because of the geopolitical aspects, but going forwards, I feel maybe it will pick up maybe.
Yeah. I'm going to give you the final word, Maurice, real quick. Considering your work with Haki in Aweri Africa, how do you think that civil society organizations can play a role in ensuring that carbon credit projects are implemented in a way that's transparent and, beneficial to all the Kenyans?
Thank you. Civil society organizations actually have a critical role to play because they interact with the community at the grassroots level. So when we are talking about sensitization, it is them who can actually do it to the people at the grassroots. And also when we are talking about just ensuring that these projects are authentic, they benefit the community, civil society organizations are the ones who are supposed to highlight the challenges that individuals are facing, where we may have papers like the documents, but the situation on the ground, it is the civil society organizations who can actually bring out and say, this project developer said this in the agreement, but they're not doing this to the community. So it is they play a role in advocacy, sensitization, and just creating awareness. Yeah.
Love it, love it, love it. Human rights and environmental lawyer Maurice Onyango, thank you so much for coming in. Dr. Kathy Mputhia Mugendi, seasoned advocate, also a writer. Thank you so much for enlightening us on this topic. Now at least we all are a lot more knowledgeable about it. We appreciate all the great work you're doing. Keep it up.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nick.
Thank you, Nick.
This is The Big Conversation on The Breakfast Show here on KBC English Service.